Hey guys, hoping all is well with everyone. So in this video we are going to be continuing the read along of the Secret Zoo Raids and Rescues. And the last time that we finished we completed chapter 4, so we'll be starting with chapter 5 today. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and without further ado we'll jump right into it. Chapter 5, The Room of Reflections. The scouts gazed up at the library, a 20-story octagonal building capped with a stained glass dome. It had taken little more than 10 minutes to get here from the secret creepy critters, and on their way they'd been joined by Solana, a descender and a good friend of Sam, Tamarin, and Hannah, de Graaf's hostages. Some of the animals that the scouts knew also came along. Podgy, an emperor penguin capable of flying, P-Dog and his coterie of rambunctious prairie dogs, and Marlo, who had taken his usual perch on Noah's shoulder. Inside, tall trees and towering bookcases shared the large open space. Shelves were fastened to tree trunks, and rows of books were lined up along horizontal branches. Monkeys in vests climbed up and down, pulling books for patrons. "This way," said Mr. Darby. They hung a left and came to a glass elevator big enough to fit them all. Podgy beside Mr. Darby, and the prairie dogs racing across everyone's feet. As they rose, Noah stared down at the passing balconies as the people lounging in pillowed chairs, sipping from steamy mugs, their attention buried in the thick books. Dozens of monkeys were climbing around, plucking books from shelves like fruit from branches. Within a minute, the marble walls of the library turned to glass, and Noah realized the elevator had ascended into the domed roof. As the world exploded with bright light, the scouts squinted out across the city of species, and Noah saw the pillars of the water tower, the hard walls of Metropolis, and a narrow wing of the secret creepy critters, which weaved through the other buildings like a wild branch of ivy. The elevator doors parted, and everyone exited onto a clear floor that made a room of the top of the dome. The walls were stained glass. Noah looked down. The glass floor was so spotless that it felt like they were standing in the air. "Okay," Ellis said. "Now, this is kind of freaky." Richie said, Are we confident this floor can support all of us at once?" "Us and a lot more," Solana said. In the middle of the room were more than a dozen men and women seated in glass chairs. They were members of the secret council. Noah could tell by their velvet coats. Off to one side was Evie, the leader of the Specters, 6 girls who could blend themselves into their surrounding by using chameleons and magic. She was sitting with one leg drawn up against her on a table made entirely of glass. Her long bangs were draped over the better part of her face, and she was twisting a drawstring on her hooded sweatshirt. The chairs were all facing the same direction, away from the elevator. Mr. Darby quietly led the scouts to a place in front of the group, and then held his arms out, saying, "The Room of Reflections." No one wondered why it was called that, but didn't ask. Mr. Darby swept an open palm toward Evie. "I've asked the leaders of the Specters to also join us today, and Solana will be representing the Descenders." Evie did nothing to acknowledge the scouts or Solana. She continued to sit on a table, twirling her drawstring around her finger. "We only await the arrival of Zach." "Zach?" Noah asked. "A technical. He should be here any..." Ding! The doors to a second glass elevator parted, and out wafted a cloud of smoke. A figure appeared, a young teenage boy waving an arm in front of his face. He swept out of the elevator, pulling a wobbling cart behind him. The cart had a metal plate with "Don't Touch, Property of Technikals" engraved on it. "Zach," Mr. Darby said, "is there a problem?" The boy shook his head. As the smoke cleared, Zach came into full view. His blue overalls and white t-shirt, both streaked with oil and smeared with soot, sagged on his skinny frame. He had a crooked, unkempt mohawk and round goggles with tinted lenses and a wide rubber strap. As he pulled his squeaky cart near the scouts, he tripped once over his feet, then opened one of the cart doors and ducked his head inside. "Where's all the smoke coming from?" Richie asked. "Oh, that's nothing, bro," Zach answered as he noisily fumbled around for something. his voice echoing in the confined space of the cart. "Another project." Mr. Darby raised an eyebrow over his sunglasses and said, "I hope that's not the project for the Conservation Committee," in a tone that was uncharacteristically stern. Zack stayed silent in a way that communicated it was. "I'll trust you'll have it working soon." Zack stayed silent again, this time to show he wasn't sure. "Zack? Have I ever let you down, Mr. D?" Mr. Darby frowned and dropped his eyebrow behind his sunglasses. After a few seconds, a squeal emitted from the cart, and the smoke stopped at once. Zack's head emerged. He pulled off his dirty goggles, spat onto each lens, and wiped them onto the cleanest spot on his t-shirt. Then he clapped his goggles back onto his face and grinned. "Ew!" Ella whispered into Megan's ear. "Please don't ever let him touch me." Zack scratched a spot on his skinny rear end, then plunged his head back into the cabinet. With him out of sight, each of the scouts turned to Mr. Darby with worried looks. "He's a bit unorthodox," Mr. Darby said apologetically, "but the Technikals are very good at what they do, I assure you." "What do you call unorthodox? I call smelly," Ella said. "And this is what that the Technikals do. Anyway." "This," Zack said, as he held out his arm. In his hand was a tiny video camera with a dozen lens tubes the size of quarter rolls looking off in different ways. Each lens was a multicolored as the glass stained around them. Several small straps with steel buckles dangled below the camera. Zack smiled, revealing a silver tooth. Mr. Darby turned to the scouts and explained, "The Technikals are exceptionally skilled in technology, and with the help of our magical scientists, they've developed ways to incorporate the Secret Zoo's magic into their contraptions. There's almost nothing the Technikals can't create." Richie said, Way cool." Ella rolled her eyes. "Show Zack your nerd gear, why don't you?" When Richie reached for his shirt pocket, Ella added, "I'm kidding, you freak." "It's a camera," Mr. Darby said, referring to what Zack was holding. "The image it produces is like nothing you've seen." "Wow," Richie said. "Let me see." "Oh, you're going to see, bro," Zack said. "We're all about to see." Ella leaned toward Megan and said, "What's up with the bro thing? This guy related to anyone?" Megan only shrugged, and from her seat on the table, Evie chuckled. Noah glanced at Evie, Solana, and Zack. 3 young teenagers from 3 different groups using magic to do extraordinary things. The Specters, the Descenders, the Technikals, the Secret Zoo never stopped surprising. Mr. Darby turned to the scouts. "Shortly after Sam and the others were captured, I received a message from de Graaf. The note said so very little that it seemed only to confirm de Graaf's whereabouts in the Secret Zoo. It was practically an invitation for the secret society to storm into the Creepy Critters sector. And why would de Graaf want that, if not to trick us?" Noah thought about this. It made sense. How many times had de Graaf had the upper hand? Just days ago, he'd fooled the secret society into believing Charlie Red was him, luring the Crossers into the cellar beneath Clarksville Elementary, setting the trap to capture Sam, Hannah, and Tamarin. Mr. Darby continued, "Council immediately met to discuss a course of action. We wondered about secretly sending in an animal to survey the sector. It would have to be a gifted, of course, so that it could understand its mission. And it would have to be small enough to stay hidden. After much deliberation, we decided on Marlo. We needed to see what he saw, and an ROR camera was our first thought." "Huh?" Ella said, squinting. "Sorry," Mr. Darby said. "ROR, Room of Reflections." He gestured around him again. Zack lifted his arm with the camera in his open palm, and a tuft of armpit hair shot out from under the short sleeve of his shirt. This morning, we strapped it onto Marlo and sent him on his way. He soon returned. Safely. Thank heavens. None of us have seen the footage yet. After a pause, Mr. Darby looked again to Zach. Are we ready? Zach wiped a smudge off his reflective goggles with his t-shirt. Just say the word, and I'll press go. Mr. Darby looked over at the crowd. Does anyone have concerns before we begin? When no one spoke up, he turned to Zach, saying, You may press go. The few council members that were standing found their seats, and Solana and the scouts moved in behind them. Zach crouched in front of the group and, with 2 loud clicks, fixed the camera onto a floor mount, the only item Noah could see in the room that wasn't made of glass. The lenses began to roll and shift, each independent of the others, like eyes of chameleons. Scouts, Mr. Darby said, I almost forgot. Try not to stare into the lenses. The floor mount began to swivel left and right. A beam of light shot from a lens into the air, struck the stained glass above, and instead of passing through, bounced back into dozens of directions, reflecting color all around. Light streamed out from a second lens and hit a new spot along the ceiling in the same way. A third beam rose, then a fourth, a fifth, more and more until all the lenses were casting light. Noah looked down at himself. His body seemed a canvas for colors to collect upon. His clothes went from purple to green to blue. A blur of different hues moved across Podgy and the prairie dogs, who'd gathered to one side. The camera began to spin on the floor mount. The bright beams began to spread and blend into one another. Soft popping noises came from all around. Speakers, Zach explained. He pointed above his head. Tiny things. They're mounted all around. The camera's equipped with several mics. Marlo. He picked up every sound when he was in there. The noise of the steady wind began to fill the room, and something to the left of the scouts began to take shape, leafy limbs and brown bark. To the scouts' right, more trees appeared. What remained of the glass ceiling became a canopy of leaves outlined in patches of the blue sky. A sophisticated, virtual world was closing in around them in perfect 3D. In the glass door, tree branches appeared above a distant city street, and animals seemed to stroll past. Lions, bears, and ostriches. A group of giraffes were reaching their long necks to snack on leaves. The virtual world dipped and turned. Marlo swerved through a batch of koalas nestled in the tree limbs, and then barely missed crashing into a sloth, which dangled upside down, its curved claws wrapped around a branch. I'm going to puke, Richie said. Then point your mouth away from me, Ella said. As the virtual world tilted, Noah reached out to brace himself before remembering he wasn't actually moving. City places came into view, the secret metropolis, platypus playground, and a giant fountain with beady streams of water standing hundreds of feet high. The kingfisher swerved to avoid a balcony and then flew down a narrow alley, birds scattering. He streamed through a cloud of hummingbirds, then through a cloud of mist. As he soared past the glass walls of butterfly nets, one side of the room of reflections seemed to crowd with butterflies, and Noah almost believed he could reach out and touch their papery wings. Ella half shouted over the sound of the wind, Beats IMAX, huh? And Noah turned to see she was holding on to the chair in front of her. Don't barf, don't barf, don't barf, Richie softly chanted. The secret creepy critters came into view. The center of the building, the creepy core, rose as high as 10 stories before ending at a concrete dome. Dozens of wings reached out in all directions, snaking between trees and other structures like the tentacles of a stone octopus. Dead ivy covered the walls, and the grass around the sector had wilted and turned black. See the ground? Mr. Darby asked. Noah turned to the voice and found Mr. Darby and the rest of the secret council seeming to fly through the treetops. The Shadowist has caused that. His existence is like a disease. Marlo swooped down toward the entrance, where 2 descenders that Noah didn't recognize stood guard. An instant later, the kingfisher plunged between 2 velvet curtains, gated into the sector, and cast the entire room of reflections into absolute darkness. Richie shrieked. Mr. Darby's voice rose in the dark. Richie, I trust all is well, yes? And I'm trusting no one got barfed on, Ella cut in. I'm okay, Richie answered. My bad. Sorry. Can anyone see anything? A woman from the secret council asked. A chorus of no's came. Shh, someone said. Noah thought it had been Solana. You guys hear that? Everyone became deathly quiet. In the recorded world, a low, rumbling growl sounded, the unmistakable noise of a Sasquatch. A second growl came, then a third, a fourth. Noah peered into the blackness all around him and couldn't see a thing, not the faintest suggestion of light. Did we lose video? Negative, Zach answered. System's still alive, bro. We're seeing exactly what Marlo saw. As the growls faded, it was obvious that Marlo was flying down the corridor, away from the velvet curtains. A dimly lit passage appeared as Marlo turned into the virtual world, and above an open doorway, a sign read, Bugs a Bunch. The creepy critters exhibit in the Clarksville Zoo had a corridor with the same name. The one Marlo was now entering was its magical counterpart. Walls of broken aquariums were covered in a writhing mass of spiders, millipedes, and cockroaches. Some were fighting, others were chomping on fallen prey. Cobwebs and cocoons dangled from the ceiling. A Sasquatch sat against one wall. Hunched over its knees, it seemed to be waiting. Countless insects had their long legs and segmented bodies tangled in its mangy fur. Okay, Ella said, her voice quivering a bit. This movie we're watching... Yeah. It just went to PG-13 really fast. Marlo flew past the Sasquatch undetected, came to a three-way intersection, and turned down a new corridor. At another intersection, Marlo turned at an open door with a sign reading, Fish Foyer. Most of the aquariums were still intact and filled with fish, but a few were broken, their dark holes surrounded by pointed pieces of glass, looking like the gaping mouths of monsters. A Sasquatch sat on the floor, its back against the wall. It seemed to be waiting, just like the other. How come that thing doesn't see Marlo? Someone said from the secret council and asked. Mr. Darby answered, Marlo's blending in with the flying insects. This made sense to Noah. At least half of the insects were bigger than the tiny kingfisher, even with the camera on his back. As Marlo made a turn into a new corridor, a cockroach flew straight toward a camera lens, and in the room of reflections, it grew and grew until its stringy antennae became the size of tree trunks. It banged off the lens, and everyone shrieked, including the secret council, who also ducked down in their chairs, arms raised around their heads. Once it was obvious what had happened, sighs of relief sounded and people eased back up in their seats. In a squeaky voice, Richie said, New underpants, please. A sign read, Legless Lane, as Marlo made a turn. Swirls of snakes slithered across the floor and one another. To Noah, they looked like a spill of giant spaghetti noodles. Oh, gee, Ella said. Dozens of cobras had reared up into the air, their hooded necks spread out. When Legless Lane came to an end, Marlo quickly found a perch in an area that looked like massive cavity within a mountain. A few thin waterfalls trickled down from the heights, splashing into murky streams. Occasional aquariums were set in the rocky walls. Much larger than the ones in the corridors, these might have once contained alligators, crocodiles, and Komodo dragons. But now their glass walls were broken. The creepy core, Mr. Darby said. Spiders and millipedes and other unnameable bugs were crawling around on the mostly open floor. Marlo suddenly fluttered a few feet over to a new perch. Beside him was a tarantula. Or what had once been a tarantula, anyway. Now it was twice its normal size, its legs as large as a small king crab's, its body as plump as a peach, its oversized eyes like a cluster of black marbles. Is that a spider? Ella asked. If you haven't noticed, it's the size of a poodle. The tarantula lunged at Marlo, who flew safely into the air. As the spider came down, it struggled to cling to the rocky wall and then tumbled over a ledge. Members of the secret council turned to one another, nervous conversations breaking out. "What?" Noah asked. "What is it? What's wrong?" It was Mr. Darby who answered. "That tarantula. It was poisoned by DeGraff. It was turned into something by his dark magic, like the Sasquatches." "And how many others have been?" a woman from the secret council asked. Mr. Darby stayed silent, as if afraid to guess. Noah looked down at the animals on the floor and felt goosebumps rise along his arms. The body of a particular snake went on and on. Noah counted 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet. More. Was it a python? Or was it a smaller snake made monstrous by the shadowist? Marlo darted over to a large pit surrounded by glass walls and capped by a glass ceiling. The space in the ground contained a few small trees, a trickling waterfall, a shallow pool, and a dirt floor with patches of long, sickly grass. "The Croc Crater," Megan said, and Noah realized they were looking at the magical counterpart to the crocodile exhibit in the Clarksville Zoo. Marlo landed on top of the glass roof beside an air vent, deep in the pit were Tank and the three descenders. The secret council gasped and sat up in their seats. "There!" Mr. Darby called out in case anyone hadn't noticed. "You see?" Marlo was frightened into the air by a sudden swarm of monstrous hornets, and he flew to a nearby spot on a freestanding rock covered with cave crickets. Here, he had another view into the pit. He chirped once, twice, trying in vain to get the attention of his friends. Tank slumped against one wall, his bald head spotted with grime. Hannah sat with her knees pulled up to her chest, her legs wrapped in her arms. Sam and Tamron seemed to be asleep on the dirt floor. Their faces were gaunt. In the room of reflections, Solana stepped toward the image of her friends. "Why don't they break out?" she asked. "Why don't they climb a tree and smash the glass or something?" "They can't," Mr. Darby said. "Not without their descender gear. You know that. The glass is too strong." He moved to a spot near Solana and pointed down into the pit, where one wall wasn't visible from Marlo's position. "The only way in or out is through a locked door on this side, the side we can't see." "Are you sure?" Solana asked. Mr. Darby nodded. "I'm almost certain. In the Clarksville Zoo, the Croc Crater has a similar door. When I first designed it..." Mr. Darby stopped abruptly. Noah rewound the old man's words in his head and let them play a second time. Had Mr. Darby designed the zoo? Evie and the other secret citizens were staring curiously at Mr. Darby. Mr. Darby said, His voice trailed off. Then he suddenly diverted his attention to the virtual world, where Marlo had flown back to the ceiling of the glass enclosure. He pointed a shaky finger into the pit and said, "There. You see the door?" Everyone turned their attention back to the video. Megan said, The virtual world began to whirl. Forgetting it wasn't real, Noah reached out and braced himself on a chair. Marlo, who had been tumbling through the air, flew straight again, stabilizing the camera. "Behind us!" someone from the secret council called out. Everyone turned around to see the image of a Sasquatch, its wicked stare locked on them. In the virtual world, the beast seemed 4 times its already enormous size. Apparently, it had just taken a swing at Marlo, knocking him off his perch. Marlo turned back the way he had come. The Sasquatch swiped at him a second time and missed, flying insects becoming entangled in the fur of his arm. As Marlo flew off, the Sasquatch chased after him, crunching across bugs. A snake bit into its heel and was dragged along, its body whipping left and right. Noah glanced to one side and saw a large window looking into a room. A man was standing inside, staring out at the commotion while holding a keychain attached to a string. Red hair, big freckles, lanky limbs, Charlie Red. As Marlo flew off, Noah noticed 2 doors on the other side of the window. The left one into Charlie's room, and the right was marked lower level. Marlo flew down Legless Lane and veered into a new corridor. Back in the fish foyer, the Sasquatch on guard lunged for him and barely missed. Noah glanced back to see the beast slam into the opposite wall, breaking glass. Water burst into the air. Seconds later, the beast pulled itself from the cavity it had made, fish flopping at its feet. It spotted Marlo, then joined the other Sasquatch in the chase. 2 Sasquatches now, someone from the council announced. Yes, Mr. Darby answered in a flat tone. There will be others. Marlo turned down a bug-filled corridor, and a 3rd Sasquatch dropped from an opening in the ceiling to join the pursuit. I can't take this, Richie declared. Noah turned to see that his friend had pulled down the ripped cup of his cap, blinding himself and reminding Noah of how a frightened turtle ducks its head into its shell. Marlo flew down a new corridor, then another. He veered through openings in the green, ropey vines that dangled from the ceiling, mosquitoes and flies showering across his body. As he headed down a particularly dark hall, the point of light at the end of it seemed to be narrowing. Noah squinted into Marlo's world. What's happening? Marlo picked up speed. As the walls whizzed by, Noah realized the passage at the end of the hall was closing. A trap, Mr. Darby said. Marlo neared the end of the corridor, and the watchers saw how a steel wall was being lowered from the ceiling. The opening was reduced to 4 feet, 3 feet, 2 feet. Marlo dipped down and flew near the floor, his wings brushing the backs of the insects there. Seconds before the gap closed, he plunged through, and the steel clattered and clanked as the last one Sasquatch crashed into the wall. Within seconds, a new Sasquatch pounced at Marlo, trying to stamp on him. As the Kingfisher flew back into the heights, the Sasquatch chased after him on all 4s. Something fell from the ceiling. A net. Marlo tucked in his wings and squirted through an opening in the cords, and the net closed around the Sasquatch, knocking it to its knees. Noah glanced around. Megan was clutching her chest. Ella had her hands pressed to her mouth. Richie came out from under his cap and was gazing out with wide eyes. Prairie dogs were huddled behind Podgy. The secret council was frowning and shaking their heads. In a new corridor, the series of trap doors swung open, hordes of insects spilling like water into their dark depths. Marlo passed easily above the danger and turned down a new corridor. The room of reflections fell into darkness, and from somewhere ahead came the low growl of several Sasquatches. Noah realized Marlo was in the corridor leading back to the city of species. The portal came into view, a sliver of light. Seconds passed. The growls shifted from the front of the room to the back as Marlo flew past his adversaries. A few seconds later, the Kingfisher shot through the crevice between the 2 curtains. The virtual world exploded with light. Trees and buildings blurred past, and the room filled with the sounds of the city. As the building that Noah had never seen came into view, the Kingfisher veered toward it, then down to the ground where Zack and Mr. Darby appeared. Zack walked over to him and reached out his arm. There was a loud click, the power button being pushed, and then both sound and sight in the 3-dimensional world exploded with static, a noisy storm of black and white dots. As the sounds poked their fingers into their ears, Zack jumped up to the camera and hit a switch, instantly returning the glass walls in the room of reflections to normal. All eyes turned to Mr. Darby. The old man took a deep breath, pulled back his shoulders, and adjusted his jacket. Then he stared out at the group through his dark sunglasses and said, "It seems our nemesis has been back for a long time." Chapter 6. The Scouts Step Up. Though Noah couldn't hear what Mr. Darby was saying to Evie, it was obvious that they were disagreeing. On the other side of the room of reflections, the old man was leaning toward her, his long beard dancing in the old open space between them as he talked. Evie stood with her arms crossed, a bend in one knee, her hip cocked out to the side. After seeing Marlo's video, the secret council had collectively agreed it would be foolish to charge into the secret creepy critters. Every corridor was a bottleneck, too narrow for an effective assault. Too many traps had been set, and too many Sasquatches were standing guard. And of the millions of insects, how many might attack, if their allegiance was now to de Graaf? Where there was mention of covert action to rescue the 4 captives, everyone fell silent. Then Mr. Darby had asked for a private moment with Evie. The secret citizens broke up into small groups to talk amongst themselves. Solana and Zack were hunched over the Technikals cart, studying the camera that had recorded Marlo's dangerous travels. The scouts were gathered around their animal friends. The prairie dogs were running around in circles, energized, it seemed, by the incredible view through the glassed floor. Megan gave a subtle, sideways nod toward Evie and Mr. Darby. "What's all that about?" "What do you think it's about?" Ella said as she batted her ponytail off her shoulder with a flick of her wrist. "A second after a mission gets mentioned, Mr. Darby walks off with this Invisigirl." Noah turned his attention back to Solana and happened to see Zack reach off one of his puny arms around his backside and pull the seat of his overalls out from the crack of his rear end. "So, you," Ella said, and Noah realized she'd seen too. She scrunched up her face and added, "That dude is too weird." A few minutes later, Evie and Mr. Darby walked back over to the rest of the group. Everyone waited to hear what the secret society leader had to say. Mr. Darby cleared his throat and announced, "Evie has agreed to attempt to rescue our friends." "By herself?" one of the council members asked. "She'll take another Specter to help her carry the Descenders' gear." Mr. Darby had already shared the story of discovering the Descenders' items outside of the secret creepy critters. "When?" "Saturday night." An older man with a bushy handlebar mustache said, "Pardon me, Mr. Darby, but isn't that the same date planned for the rescue of Blizzard and Little Bighorn? Won't Evie be needed there?" "Evie's agreed to split up her team. One Specter will go with her, the other 4 will go with Solana and..." He looked over to the scouts. "Our friends from the outside, I am hoping." Ella took a step back, and Richie grabbed for his heart. "Us?" Richie said. "Us? When did..." "My apologies, Richie," Mr. Darby said. "I hadn't meant for the topic to arise this way." The man with the big mustache said, "They don't know." "I'm afraid not." "No, what?" Richie asked. Mr. Darby turned his entire body toward the scouts. "My primary reason for inviting you here today is to ask you a question." He paused and rubbed his chin. "Would you be willing to join us in the attempt to rescue Blizzard and Little Bighorn?" Richie gasped, but the other scouts hardly flinched. "Council has already spoken on the matter," Mr. Darby went on, "and we feel the 4 of you are needed. Our 2 gifteds have been shot, tranquilized, and imprisoned. There's no telling what emotional state they'll be in. Despite their intelligence, Blizzard and Little Bighorn are still animals. The 4 of you can help them, calm them. They know you. They trust you. When I watch you with them, I see something beyond friendship. I see something close to family. They'll feel your love, and it'll keep them peaceful." Mr. Darby was right. Noah thought of all the adventures he'd spent with Blizzard, the times they had spent cross-training, and even sleeping side by side in Arctic Town in the Forest of Flight. They'd risked their own lives to protect each other. Blizzard in the Darklands, Noah in his school gymnasium just days ago. Mr. Darby said, "They're your special friends. Ours too. Help us to help them." Noah looked over at the other scouts. If they were caught breaking into the Waterford Zoo, their lives would never be the same. Megan met Noah's eyes, and she nodded, her pigtails swinging on the sides of her head. "Excellent," Mr. Darby said. "There is, of course, the matter of your parents." "Sleepovers," Megan said at once. "On Saturday, I'll go to Ella's, and Noah can stay at Richie's. We'll sneak out once our parents go to sleep." "You'll need to go in as ghosts," Mr. Darby said. "Specters." "But how?" Noah said. "There are 12 pairs of portal pants in existence. 2 pairs for each Specter. 4 will go on loan to you. Evie, how long will it take you to train the scouts to use your gear? Evie looked out from beneath her bangs with one eye. We can do the basics in 2 sessions. 3 tops. I can get them to ghost, but that's about it. Of course, Mr. Darby said. I don't expect them to mirage. Megan looked over to Noah and mouthed, Mirage? Noah just shrugged. Mr. Darby's smile broadened. Excellent. Plan to meet Evie and her companions tomorrow in Butterfly Nets. In the meantime, Council will review the layout of the Waterford Zoo and study Marlo's video to come up with a safe passage into the creepy core. As for right now, I'm afraid the 4 of you need to go to get home. You all already been here. Wait, Noah said. I noticed something in the video that might be important. You guys saw Charlie Red, right? Almost everyone nodded, frowning. Did you see the doors? The ones next to the room he was in? When no one responded, Noah added, one of them was marked lower level. It must be a staircase, and I bet it goes to the crater door, the one that's kept locked. Mr. Darby said. I wonder if our old friend Charlie has the key. Noah nodded. He was swinging his keychain in the video. Hold on, Megan said. We already have a key. The magic one. The one we used for the Clarksville Zoo. Mr. Darby shook his head. That key was designed to only work in the outside, a safety mechanism imposed by Council. To Noah, he said, Thank you. We'll review the video again for more clues. Noah nodded once more, and the scouts and their animal companions were led across the room of reflections. Evie, Solana, and the Secret Council watched them go. After stepping onto the elevator, they swung around to face Mr. Darby. You should know something, Mr. Darby said. Wearing the Specters' gear isn't like wearing anything in the world, yours or mine. How? Richie asked, a hint of worry in his tone. Instead of answering Richie's question, Mr. Darby said, Thank you. All. Thank you for your commitment to us, and to all the animals you love. Before Noah could respond, the glass doors of the elevator sealed shut, and the scouts plummeted into the depths of the majestic library in the ever-changing world of the Secret Zoo. And I'll stop the video there, ending chapter 6. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and as always, please take good care of yourselves, you guys. Be safe, and I look forward to seeing you in our continuation of the Secret Zoo raids and rescues. And as always, we hope to see you soon. Take good care. Bye.